Hello, it's Stuart, the Unrepented Atheist, and today I've got Richard Swinburne, Christian philosopher, theologian from Oxford University, no less, and Alex O'Connor is interviewing him, doing a podcast, and he has been invited to Richard Swinburne's library or study at his home. So let's go. They're discussing free will, souls, problem of evil. I'm primarily interested in what he's got to say about souls. Alex has asked him to define human being, and he's kind of, in my opinion, fumbled around a bit with that one and not really settled on a definition, and he's ended up saying, oh, it doesn't really matter because it's not, but let's just hear a little bit more about what he's got to say about defining what a human being is.
Perhaps as to whether, if we find creatures on other planets who look rather like us and seem to have similar abilities, whether they would be humans or whether they wouldn't be because they were descended from quite different roots than ourselves. So we have to give a careful definition of that.
If we went to another planet and we found life and we found beings that looked exactly like us, and I suppose genetically they were the same, then I suppose it would be fair to say that they indeed would be human beings, and that evolution would have followed a very, very similar path to what it did on Earth.
And I don't think it's a very important word in itself, because I think it's not what philosophers call an essential kind. That is to say, I could be me even if I ceased to be human.
Now, let's just think about that. He's saying that he could still be himself and not be human. Well, obviously him being human means that he's got his body, he's got his biological self, and he's saying that if he was no longer his biological material self, that he could still be himself. He could still be himself. That must mean that he doesn't see his sort of physical body as being synonymous with him, if he could still be himself and yet not have a body. Okay, let's find out. Let's continue.
If, for example, I gradually grew an alligator body and had thoughts and feelings like alligators.
Well, let's just study what he said. If I grew an alligator body, what is this I that is going to grow an alligator body? I don't really understand what he's referring to, essentially, when he says I, the perpendicular pronoun.
There would be every reason to say that I was no longer a human, but instead an alligator.
Well, I would agree with that if he was an alligator, he wouldn't be a human being. That's true, but I still don't know what this I is that he's talking about that could still be him if he wasn't a human being.
So you can define it as you want, but I think the most useful definition...
Well, I don't really think it's true that you can define a human as you want. I mean, I've got here a Scotch tape dispenser. I suppose I could define that as a human being, but I'd be completely wrong to do so.
Is that it is someone like us who has similar abilities and appearance and origins from ourselves. And that'll do.
Now, crucially, you would imagine perhaps that the word person is more applicable than human here, as being more than merely material. A lot of people, when they define what a person is or what a human is, they think it's essentially, as you say, a member of the Homo species race of creatures. But you like to think of persons as more than merely material.
Yes, I think that's a much wider term. I mean, persons includes humans, but it's a much wider term, and I would define it as a pure mental substance. I'll give you a definition of that in a moment. A pure mental substance who has free will and moral beliefs and certain powers to make a difference to things.
Well, he's talking there about a mental substance, and really, I think that he should be. I think he should be defining that. A substance. I take a substance to be something which is material. Now, if he's talking about a mental substance, we're talking about sort of cognitive state, something that goes on in the brain. I would just take that as the brain, which is obviously a material thing.
And that is compatible with them either having a body or not having a body. I understand by a pure mental substance, one for whose existence nothing material is necessary. Well,
this is where I start to. Well, I mean, I've already got problems with what he's saying, because he's made this statement that he could be an alligator and still be himself, even if he didn't have his human body. He could literally be in a different body. Now he's talking about mental substance. The only mental states that I'm aware of. My knowledge of biology is not fantastic, but however, the only mental states that I'm aware of actually happen inside the brain and don't happen anywhere else. I haven't got any. I'm not aware of any evidence that mental states can happen anywhere but in the brain. They're attached to obviously a mental, a physical biological organ.
I think that'll do.
That's twice he said that'll do. First he says that'll do with the definition of a human being, and now he's saying that'll do. And he's talking about these mental substances, which he hasn't really properly defined. I do hope that Alex is going to challenge him on this.
So a person, at least an embodied person who's alive right now, like you and me, we, in your view, consist of two parts?
Yes.
And that would be broadly described as a mind.
Now, wait a minute. Alex has just said, did you hear what he did? He used this term embodied person, and he's sort of implying there that a person could be unembodied. I don't really think he should be making that concession, unless he's merely talking hypothetically in order to move the conversation along, which I can understand.
Mind or a soul connected to a physical body.
Yes, I'm using soul in the sense that Plato and Descartes used it.
Well, of course he would do that, wouldn't he? Mention two of the greatest philosophers in history who were both, let's face it, essentially wrong.
As a thing which has properties. A substance is the philosophical technical term.
Yes. Now, what I wanted to ask you about is one of the first problems that people encounter when considering persons as being material and also partly immaterial, which is the problem of interaction between these two parts of the human being. It seems that if I were to prod your brain in various ways, it affects the mind. And similarly, it seems impossible for the mind to change or do anything in any way without the brain also doing something. So this leads a lot of people to think that the mind and the brain are just the same thing. What is it that allows us to separate these out and to explain how they could possibly interact if one is material and one is not?
It certainly doesn't follow from the fact that one makes a difference to the other, and conversely that they must be the same thing. That's quite a further question.
Well, hold on. Of course, I agree with him that it doesn't follow that the brain and the mind are the same thing. The brain can be a lot more than the mind, but the mind could be simply a product of the brain, a function of the brain.
So your question is, how can they interact? And I'm just saying, well, it's a basic truth that they do interact.
Oh, so it's a properly basic belief, one that we should accept without scrutinizing the possibility of it.
I can show you that by saying that if you stick a pin into me, I feel pain. And pain is a mental property, a pure mental property, in the sense that it is one to which the subject has direct experience and necessarily is better placed to know about than anyone else. I can know whether I'm in pain better than you can, and that's a necessary truth. It wouldn't be...
That doesn't really prove anything, does it? All we're talking about is sticking a pin into somebody, stimulating pain receptors, which the physical brain is equipped to receive, and of course it's a biological safety mechanism to stop us from hurting ourselves. I don't really see how that line of argument gets us anywhere closer to establishing that there is in fact this sort of mental substance which can exist independently of a brain.
My pain, if you could know about it better than I can, it wouldn't be a pain at all. There are lots and lots of mental properties, and a soul, as I understand it, is capable of having mental properties.
Well, all he's done there is taken a philosophical definition of the soul and said that as he understands it, this is what the soul does. So we should just accept it as a properly basic belief, because that's how it's been defined.
I should have said that at the beginning.
Well, it wouldn't have made any difference had you said it at the beginning. It would still be as fallacious as it is later on in the conversation.
As well as satisfying my definition, then given it must be capable of having mental properties, these being properties to which the subject has privileged access. Now, given that, it's just obvious that things in my brain cause mental properties, and mental properties such as my making decisions or spontaneously crying out when I have a pain, these are interactions.
Okay, wait a minute. So he said that, okay, look, I mean, I agree with him there. It is obvious that things in his brain cause these mental states. But that's not getting us any closer to his assertion that his essential self is immaterial, this thing called a mental substance, which he implies that if this mental substance could go into another body, for example, an alligator, and it would still be him. If the brain is a biological thing and it's causing these mental states, then there's nothing about that which is the soul.
Don't understand how that can happen. Well,
and I always get worried when I'm surprised to hear it at this level. We're talking about this man is an Oxford professor, no less, and he's saying, oh, it's just obvious. I mean, we hear this from atheist experience callers week in, week out. We hear it from William Lane Craig. Well, of course we do. I mean, he's like a high-flying philosopher as well. So, but of course, Christian, I suppose I shouldn't be surprised. It doesn't matter how high up you go in the academic hierarchy. We're always going to find these, oh, it's just obvious. If you would just think about it, you would understand that there is a soul.
We are not omniscient, but it's obvious it does happen, and I think we must start from there.
But do you see why people see it as a problem or an objection to the idea that there is a separation between mind and body, that two things of an entirely different category?
Well, Alex, you should really prepare better. You've already put this to him, and he spent time ineffectively dealing with it, but okay.
Just accept it as a basic fact that they do interact and that they can have or exert control over each other. But do you understand why it is that people see this as a problem, given that these are two totally different kinds of substances? It seems a very strange mystery that they should be even able in principle to touch each other.
Well, I don't see why, but I can understand in the present climate where physicalism is so rampant that people think this without questioning. But
well, it's not just in the present climate. I mean, you can go way back, back into the 19th and even 18th centuries, where this kind of skepticism about the existence of the soul took hold. So it's not something which is recent. Yeah.
If they settled down and thought about it.
Now there we are. That's where he's discrediting himself. This is where, some time ago, an atheist called in and spoke to Matt Dillahunty and said, if only these Christians would think about it, they would realize they're wrong. And I mean, she's right down, she's at the lowest level of sort of counter-apologetics, and Matt called her out on that. And it's instead of proper argument and evidence. You say it's obvious. If only you sat down and think about it, you would see that it's true. It's when you've got no evidence and when you've got no proper argumentation to support what you're saying. And at this level, he should be ashamed of himself.
Realised that there were properties to which the subject has privileged access and properties which are publicly accessible. All physical properties are publicly accessible, and they will realise that these make a difference to each other.
Oh dear. Okay, well look, I'm not going to do the whole thing because obviously it's quite a long video. I'll probably do another video on another topic which they discuss, maybe free will. I'm not sure yet. But I found that really interesting because, I mean, look, I don't want to tell you what grade I got when I did philosophy A-level, 25 years ago. I can see the holes in what he's saying, and I think that a lot of people can. There's nothing of proper convincing substance that he said that leads me any closer to the belief that there's this thing called a soul. And I think a lot of what he said was actually preposterous and demonstrably false. Let me know what you think. Again, I wasn't delighted with Alex's performance. I think he could have really grilled them on this one, but what can you do when you go to an Oxford professor's house and you're sitting in his library, which is probably quite a privileged place to be with all the books? It probably doesn't bring out the best in your argumentative abilities and willingness to really challenge and engage with him on some of these issues. That's all for now. I'd really like to hear your comments on that, on this video that I've made. Bye for now.